Let's bring in today's political panel now, and I'm joined in the studio by the Assistant Minister for Finance, Charities and Electoral Matters, Zed Seselja, and making her debut appearance on Capitol Hill, Labor member for Macquarie, Susan Templeman.
Thanks,
Thank you for joining me today. Well, Zed Seselja, we've been talking about the reshuffle today. This has all been prompted because of the National Party. Are you hoping now that the Nationals tidy up, clean up their act and stop becoming such a liability for the government?
Well, look, I don't accept that characterisation of our Nationals friends. Obviously, they've been through, some challenges in the last few days, and they've made their decisions as a party room, and that's what party rooms do from time to time. But, very pleased that we've got such outstanding members of Parliament who can come into those senior roles. There's no shortage of talent either in the Nationals or the Liberal Party, and when we see very good people moving out of the ministry, we see some outstanding people moving into the ministry as well.
Darren Chester earlier in the week apologised to Nationals voters for starting this parliamentary year with another leadership challenge. It seems to be the perennial issue in Australian politics. How frustrating was it standing from the kind of Liberal side, watching the Nationals possibly tear themselves apart?
Well, look, again, I don't accept the characterisation that you've made. Obviously, though, these things are always challenging. I've seen the inside of it, and I'm not going to sit there and lecture. But there's no doubt that in terms of what we're getting on with, in terms of policy, that's the most important thing. So these things do cause distractions, but the Nationals have made their decision and are getting on with it, as is the government.
All right, Susan Templeman, I'm loath to give either party free kicks when it comes to internal divisions in the other side, but on the specifics of the reshuffle, as we were discussing earlier, Keith Pitt now has both resources and water. Does Labor have any concerns about those two portfolios being under the same minister?
Well, look, it's obviously early days in terms of how the new minister will handle it. And look, you're spot on. They've been in a mess. We really need to see them get their act together because water is an absolutely crucial portfolio. And the sustainability of our whole economy, our communities, our agriculture depends on them getting it right. So I think it does raise questions about how that is going to be managed. I think we also have to look at his absolute love of nuclear energy, and the Prime Minister needs to come clean, having put him in this position as to what the plan is for nuclear energy. Yeah. So there are this will raise a whole lot of issues, and it is clearly something that the Prime Minister has to manage because the Nationals are a key part of that coalition, but yeah, they cause them some trouble.
Yeah, he has been certainly advocating nuclear power from the backbench. So now that he's, in the tent within Cabinet, you would imagine that his views would be more in line with government policy. But there is, of course, an inquiry underway into nuclear power at the moment. Labor, as a party policy, remains firmly opposed. Can you ever see that changing?
I can't see it changing, and I guess we'll see what the inquiry position it takes. Can I just say the other really disappointing thing about the start of this parliament was that the national leadership took away from our first day focus on the bushfires. Now that was on mourning people who had died in those fires and mourning the losses that people had experienced. And, I think this parliament would be great to see some discipline so that the really big issues that affect people not here in Canberra but in their own homes are given the priority.
Well, your electorate was devastated in parts from the bushfire crisis. Sticking with that theme, the Blue Mountains were ablaze over summer. We know there's a Royal Commission that'll be coming into this whole crisis. What are the issues that you and your constituents identified on the ground that should be looked at as part of this commission?
Well, I would like to see it an incredibly wide-ranging inquiry. I think it's disappointing that people whose areas have been very directly affected, like mine, like the South Coast, haven't been consulted at all about the terms of reference for the inquiry. We do want to see everything from the impact of climate change looked at. How did that play out in this particular circumstance, through to the need for policies that people think will achieve our outcomes on traditional burning and hazard reductions. I think we need to see the whole spectrum of things. We also, I hope, will see a really good look at how we resource our emergency services appropriately to be able to respond to these. Now, the fire in my region that hit the Blue Mountains and the Hawkesbury was the largest ever recorded fire in the world from a single ignition point.
That's huge.
Now, this is an unprecedented thing, And the inquiry, what worries me is it sounds like it might be a quick and dirty inquiry. It needs to be thorough, and it needs to give people the chance on the ground to tell their stories of what they experienced. They've been through a trauma. They need to be able to share that and the lessons learned from it.
Yeah, well, the Prime Minister has said that he wants to see the inquiry wrapped up so that the recommendations can be put in place for the next fire season coming. We've seen some of the terms of reference, so that it'll include hazard reduction and include the phrase climate change is affecting Australia's ability to prevent, mitigate and respond to natural disasters. So that's in the terms of reference. So climate change will be a part of that. Do you agree with that statement, that climate change is affecting Australia's ability to prevent and mitigate these disasters?
Well, clearly, as the temperature warms, and that's what we've seen over the last couple of decades in particular, you're going to face greater challenges when it comes to things like fire. Now, all things being equal, if you have warmer weather, if you have the same amount of fuel, you're going to have problems. So you've got to look at it from the perspective of you do your bit with the global community on emissions reduction, but at a local level, in addition to that, you have to plan for the fact that it actually is going to be warmer, and in which case you need less fuel. You need to have better fuel management than we've had in the past, because we've always had bushfires. It's just going to be a question of if you get more warm days, you'll have more risk on some of those summers. Not every summer will be like that. Summers go up and down, as we've seen in recent years, but here in Canberra in 2003, we experienced some of the severest bushfires this country's ever seen, almost 500 homes lost. We see them still burning in parts of the ACT at the moment. So fuel reduction, how we manage that, I don't think that's been done very well in this country in recent years. I remember after the 2003 bushfires here, there was a lot of soul searching about that, yet the targets don't get met. We saw it after Black Saturday in 2009, so that has to be front and centre. And one of the reasons the PM has said, you know, we're going to look at what's been done, because there has been many inquiries into bushfires in this country. So we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We want to learn from those and learn how in a new environment we continue to respond.
So should states and territories be penalised if they don't meet sort of targets for hazard reduction? And on that topic, wasn't it a big problem last year because it was so dry, like the drought was really setting in, that a lot of hazard reduction operations couldn't go ahead?
Well, in some cases that will be the case, but you have to look at, you know, what are the land clearing laws, because we know that it's not just what governments do. We know that in parts of Queensland and other places, landholders are frustrated that they can't protect their land, and we've heard many stories across the country of that happening. So, you know, yes, when it's dry, it's hard, but you will have periods where you can, and certainly we believe some form of national standards for hazard reduction is absolutely critical as we respond to that. If you know, and it's always interesting to me that you know, when we hear from the Greens in particular, who talk about things like a climate emergency and the like, but they are the first to reject measures that would actually help protect if you're going to have warmer weather.
Yeah, well, this whole bushfire season has really shifted the debate on climate change and energy, or at least put the spotlight on that. And your Nationals colleague, Matt Canavan, this week has said that he wants to see coal-fired power stations built across the country. The Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, addressed this just a moment ago in a press conference, so we'll just bring you that grab now.
It's a common sense position that recognises that the reliability of our energy system, our electricity system, depends on those stations, and that's why those assets will be swept for as long as possible. And you'll know that in the arrangement that we came to with the New South Wales government just the other week, it just didn't deliver another 70 petajoules a year of gas. It also required the removal of obstacles that would see the resource get to the Mount Piper coal-fired power plant as well. Why? Because that's necessary to meet the dual objectives of reliability in the system, which keeps power prices down, but also enables you to move over time to what the market is clearly already recognising and acting upon.
So that was Scott Morrison there talking about the government's the government's energy policy, particularly in light of that suggestion from Matt Canavan. Just staying with you for a moment, Zed Seselja, is Matt Canavan sort of throwing a bone to his, voters in Queensland on this issue of coal, which we know is a really big topic up there, or is this something that the government should be considering? Well,
We consider all reasonable measures to make sure we achieve our ends. And our ends are We want to meet our emissions reduction targets. We want to keep the lights on. We want to have reliable, affordable electricity for our economy, and we want to continue to support jobs. So all of those things coming together means we've got huge investments in renewable energy. That's a good thing. We continue to see either the extension of the life of coal-fired power in some circumstances, and we certainly still see a coal industry in this country. But also we see a transition with things like gas, and that's some of the announcements we've seen. So we don't throw all of our eggs into one part of the energy mix. I think even Anthony Albanese recognised recently that even with some of their, I think, irresponsible targets, that even with a 50% renewable energy target, that 50% clearly would still come from fossil fuels.
Well, Susan Templeman, just to finish on this, Labor is still deciding what kind of emissions reduction target it'll take to the next election. It's a long way away, I understand that. But it looks like the 45% by 2030 has been dumped. But do you think that between last election and now the debate has changed? Should Labor be more ambitious or even more ambitious than it has been?
I think a lot of things have changed since then, but they'll also change going forward. This summer and spring of bushfires has changed things. And the most interesting thing that the Prime Minister said then was that the technology is changing and transitioning. Industry is way ahead of governments, and they're doing that in spite of a government with no policy around this.
Well,
it's one thing to say you've got a policy, but it's another for it to be rolled out in a way that gives industry certainty. Just saying you've got one doesn't make it so.
But on the emissions reduction target?
And our target will be what this country needs to make sure that we don't see another summer like the one we've had. We can't accept that it's just mitigation. We actually need to make sure we do properly play our role so we don't rank 57 out of 57 in a global list of climate policies. We've got a lot to do.
All right, Susan Templeman, said to Selja, I'm sorry we have to leave it there. Question time is rapidly approaching, so thank you very much for joining me today.